Well, welcome to this conversation, Gary, Brian, and Steve. I'm really excited about this. I feel like a kid waiting for Christmas last night to have this conversation. We've been working on this presentation now for about 4 weeks, and every time we go through this, I get more and more excited. What I wanted to do is just start this conversation with kind of just some numbers that we can throw out there, some that were surprising to me as we were preparing to do this. The first thing I thought about when we were doing this is that when I normally think of cyber attacks, I think of them stealing government secrets or trade secrets or credit card information. And I really didn't think about how important and how valuable healthcare record and information was. And I was really surprised. So on the slide that you see in front of you is that we can see that the range for, a healthcare record on the dark web or in the black market is somewhere between $250 per record to $1,000. And that's much higher than I thought it would be. So Steve, why do you think the information is so valuable in these dark markets? And
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So great to be here today. Like Tim, I'm really excited to have a conversation about this topic. It's affecting lots and lots of people. So I look forward to presenting, sharing some thoughts, some experiences, and getting to the Q&A at the end, because I'd love to interact with the rest of you. So yeah, Tim, the cost of the record on the dark web for healthcare is worth a lot because there's a lot of information there, right? When you think about a typical financial breach, right? When credit card number gets stolen, really what the bad actors are getting is a credit card number and maybe your name. Right. And so the credit card companies have gotten really good at shutting that type of fraud down, or that breach down, right? They just kill the credit card number. When you get the medical record, right, there is a ton of personal identifiable information there, right? And with that information, I can create false identities. I can commit some healthcare fraud. I can obtain illegal prescriptions legally. Or I can get medical equipment. I can even create tax fraud, right? Because I have so much information because that's in the patient record, right? So the tail of what I can do with that record and how I can leverage it is just worth a lot of money.
Yeah, that's a great point. You kind of think about it, this information that's in your healthcare record is stuff that's not changing over time as well, right? So
yeah, correct. Social security number, right? A credit card number gets stolen, you get a new credit card, right? Your social security number gets stolen, you have that number for life.
Oh, awesome. Well, thanks for that.
Tim, before we move on, is it okay if I do my poll?
Please, yes.
Almost forgot, but just before everyone gets started, if you guys don't mind, we have a great poll here that just to help understand who we are speaking with today. So up on the screen here, a poll should have just popped up and a few questions. Would love your feedback. So first, just how did you find this webinar, which is just a helpful question for us. This is all anonymous, by the way. Second, has your practice ever experienced a data breach? It would be great to know if you guys have gone through this or if you're just here to prevent that from happening. How long do you think a medical practice would be down in a single data breach? Does you guys all see this poll? Is it popped up on your screens?
Yep.
Okay, great. How long do you think a medical practice would be down? What is the average cost of a data breach for a practice with 25 computers? And do you already have cyber security insurance? I think it'll be really interesting to see a couple of these answers. So I'll just give you guys a few more seconds here. I know it's a lot of questions. And I hope that many of you say you have not yet experienced a data breach and that we are going to hopefully help today, help you prevent that from happening. All right, 5 more seconds. All right, last chance. Here we go. All right, so sharing the results so our speakers can see. So most of you found out about this webinar from email. Great feedback, thank you. Okay, I'm very happy to hear only 14% of you have experienced a data breach, but in reality, that's still a lot. And I'm sure for every single one of you, it still doesn't feel like a great thing that you're in one of that 14%. How long do you think a medical practice would be down in a single data breach? It seems most people thought 2 to 3 days for up to 1 to 2 weeks. what's the average cost of a data breach? Most of you are thinking it's $250,000. So maybe you've been to one of these cybersecurity webinars before. Do you already have security insurance? It looks like most of you do, and then many of you that are in process of doing it. So thank you so much for answering those questions. I hope that leads to a better conversation as we go through the rest of this webinar.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Well, the good news is that only 14% have experienced that, but when it happens to you, it's the worst day in your life, isn't it? The next thing I just wanted to kind of point out here is that when we look at, when I first started, putting this seminar together, one of the things that I was, thinking about was that it wouldn't be the small practices that were being hit and being compromised and being attacked and being targeted. I thought it would be the big healthcare systems, that the hospitals, urgent care facilities, but I was really shocked to find out how many, medical clinics were being targeted by the cybersecurity threats. So Gary, I know you deal with this every day. You're talking to healthcare providers that have been compromised or are under attack. Why do you think that's happening?
Yeah, Tim, I think this is a great question. Most people agree with you. They're going to say, the threat actors, the bad actors are going to go after the big hospital systems because there's a lot of records there. They typically have a lot of money to pay ransom. But what we see is kind of the opposite. We see a lot of smaller organizations being hit. Now, the question is why? I think the reality is the hackers aren't Googling, ABC Medical Clinic in Phoenix. They basically scour the internet looking for these opportunities. And if they stumble across a healthcare entity that has their network exposed incorrectly, they're going to target them and hit them. So I think that's the reality of it. From an email perspective, sure, one could argue if they get lists of emails that are associated with healthcare entities, then yes, there's more of a targeting attack there. But when they're going after these networks, a lot of times we see it as an accidental hit. And then when they realize it's a healthcare entity, kind of the alarms go off in those hacking groups because they realize, hey, there's a high likelihood we're going to get paid now because they understand the healthcare laws in the United States, and they know that almost all healthcare entities that are victims of these attacks will pay the ransom.
And nowadays, most people, more and more people have no choice but to pay some form of ransom, it seems like.
Right.
The one thing I would just ask, on this to kind of follow up a little bit, it seems like from the early days of cyber threats, it was a kind of a brute force method. We just went out and scanned, we found the vulnerability, then we started driving down to it. But what I've seen, and I think you've probably experienced this too, the attacks are becoming a lot more sophisticated. Once they find that exploit, it's no longer that brute force. They're learning about the organization. They're doing they're doing reconnaissance before they actually exploit the attack. Are you seeing the same thing as well, Gary?
Yeah, look, most of these threat groups will persist on the network for about 2 weeks, gathering intelligence, reconnaissance, learning all of the operational elements of the organization, how they back up, where they back up, what type of cloud access do they have. They want to know as much as they can because in the end, Tim, their goal is to make sure they get paid. And the more information they have and the more damage they can do, the higher the likelihood of the payment. So yes, that's exactly what we see.
It's like casing a bank a little bit, right?
That's exactly what it is. Yep.
Exactly. So the other thing I thought was strange, strange as I was going through this, the amount of actual data leak that happens with a compromise. I know that when we're looking at here, 72% thereabouts is what people are reporting that data was compromised, was taken off the network, and there's 15% is unknown what happened with that. So this number could be much higher of data that's actually being taken from these institutions and actually shared out on the dark web. Steve, I know you've been working with some clients that have had some challenges in the past and organizations that have looked to us to help them. Are you seeing the same kind of thing with these numbers?
Yeah, it's normally we say, my conversation with Gary and the rest of the team, we think it's about 75%. So this just kind of, tells that story. And I think it's, as Gary's going to go through the scenario that we're chatting about today, the practice that was hit, we talk about triple threat. right? And the triple threat, a lot of that has to do with the exfiltration of data, right? Because once they get the data, they have much greater opportunity to get you to pay. So it's not just, hey, we're going to encrypt your data anymore. It's we got to get the data in order to increase the likelihood of getting paid for the actual event. But also, we talked about in the first slide, right? If you have the data and it was leaked, it's worth a lot more money than just the ransomware against the practice itself.
Well, I think, I think the term here is leverage, right? They have more leverage to make sure that that ransom payment is being paid. It's not just about backing up and restoring data anymore. It's about stopping from being spread out, spread out in places you don't want it to be spread out in. So good. The other thing I thought was really interesting is the cost. It seems like every year the cost to, kind of deal with a breach is increasing. So Steve, you want to take a few seconds and kind of just walk through this chart for us?
Yeah, and this is again one of those somewhat stunning charts, right? This is data coming from IBM on the cost of an average breach, by employee count, right? And you can see this. The scale is pretty large in terms of number of employees. Going from less than 500 when you get up to the 5,000 to 10,000. That number gets very significant, right? So when we talk about cyber insurance, right? The policy, how much money do we have to defend against this? And what I find most is that when people talk about the cost of a breach, they're just thinking about the breach itself, right? What am I going to have to pay for the ransom, right? What am I going to have to pay, the attorneys or their forensic people to get back online? They don't consider the tail of the breach, right? The potential lawsuits, all the soft costs associated with, bad reputation, loss of business, potentially loss of employees because they're just so stressed out from the event, right? All those costs need to be factored in. And I think most people would be stunned at the actual cost, right? Over, they measure this over a 3-year period, right? Because they say that the tail of a breach is that long.
Wow. So it's not just the immediate impact of the breach and the compromise, but it's what happens there across. And it can be everything from lawsuits to patient information that's being leaked out that's causing problems across the board. So reputation.
Yep.
The interesting thing, what I find is interesting, if we look at organizations less than 500, it seems like roughly it's about each breach is about $3 million that a organization could, in that kind of overall range, we averaged it. I wonder how much of that money is coming from insurances versus out of their own pockets. Is anyone have a clue on that? Or
I mean, I can chip in. I'm sure Brian has some feedback as well. It's all over the map. We deal with healthcare entities that have literally no insurance. Multi-million-dollar operations that have no insurance. We deal with healthcare entities that have a couple $1 million policies, and then kind of everything in between. I would say for most of the smaller healthcare entities, we're seeing around $1 million. Brian, I don't know what you're seeing, but and they're also starting to ramp up in terms of increasing their insurance policies. But I'll pass it off to Brian.
Yeah, it's appetite, it's risk appetite, and what you're willing to take. I would say for small to mid-sized companies, I'm typically seeing $1 million to $3 million. Because quite frankly, after that, it becomes very, very costly. I do have one account recently that had $5 million in limits, but it's an expensive policy.